Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Cybersecurity for Remote Workers. I'd like to thank David Shipley for being here and doing this. David is on our board, works for Beauceron Security, and if anybody's going to do a presentation on this, we definitely want it to be David. We just want to say thank you from the Chamber for all the support. Thank you for reading all of our emails and everything that's coming through. And thank you for attending our webinar events. It's been really great. Look out for your email because we will be sending more e-blasts with more events in the next few weeks. So we're really excited about that. We'll be doing another networking session with breakout rooms this time. So we're going to try that, see how that goes. And so from here, I'm going to say, take it away, David. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Tanya. And thanks to the Chamber for the opportunity to do this session for fellow entrepreneurs and business owners. A little bit of background on me. I am a certified information security manager, so I hold a professional designation in cybersecurity. I co-founded Beauceron, 5 years ago in November. Our mission is to put people in control of technology. That cybersecurity really isn't a technology issue. It's about people, process, and culture combined with technology. And with this current pandemic and the rush to work remotely, we've never seen that combination accelerated quite to this degree, both by criminals and by organizations still trying to do business. So I hope that this can help provide some valuable insights and advice. There is some guidance in here that's for a post-pandemic world, because I believe remote work was fairly significant before the pandemic, will be even more significant for business after the pandemic. So what's interesting is there's actually some data that shows that up to 47% of Canadians before the pandemic were working remotely up to 2.5 days per week or more. And worldwide, that stat was increasing. And of course, with the persistent connectivity we've enjoyed for the last 20 years, this has enabled people to be more productive. And it's enabled advantages for businesses to enable work-life balance, to enable the access to talent in other areas that may not be in your local area. So there are a lot of benefits to leveraging remote work. And there are a lot of really interesting studies that show how remote work can actually increase productivity and business value. And in the case of our current emergency, this can allow for business continuity. I would like to make a quick note to business owners right now that we are operating remotely during a pandemic, which means productivity is not the same as enabling remote work in normal times, and expectations and management approaches need to adjust for that. So please don't completely judge the ability of your employees to carry on the business and productivity solely based on the pandemic. Keep in mind that the effects of this are significant. So one of the things that I want to say is that while many workplaces have embedded cybersecurity into their company culture through great programs like cybersecurity awareness, policies, town halls, if remote workers aren't following security best practices, the whole organization can still be at risk. Just because you're not at work doesn't mean that your work information, your clients, your business secrets aren't at risk. But there are simple things that can be done without having to spend a lot of money that can dramatically reduce your risk. So this seems a little ahead of the curve here. We're not quite ready to all rush back into going to public places and jumping onto public Wi-Fi, but it is good to know that, you know, when we do get back to our normal, when we're thinking about joining the Starbucks Wi-Fi, the airport Wi-Fi, other places, the first point I want to make is you don't know that that Wi-Fi access point, just because it says Starbucks, doesn't mean it's actually Starbucks. It could be David's laptop broadcasting a new Wi-Fi access point. You're joyfully connecting, thinking you're connecting straight to Starbucks. You're not. You're connecting to my computer, and I'm connecting you to the internet. And in the meantime, I can read all of the traffic that you're sending over your communications. So be careful what you access on public Wi-Fi. If you do need to use public Wi-Fi, this is a great use for a virtual private network or VPN. And so this can secure your communications. Even if it's the regular Starbucks Wi-Fi, anybody also connected to Starbucks can potentially interfere or listen to your communications. A VPN will protect you from that. If it's a malicious actor pretending to try and get in the middle of your communications, VPN tools can alert you to that as well. So think about that. One thing that we recommend for our sales team and for others, if they need to do something critical, like update sensitive information in our CRM, I need to access banking information, I'll often tether my phone to my laptop and connect via that way versus using public Wi-Fi, because that's a little bit more secure and a little bit more reliable than using public Wi-Fi. And I'll pause. Tanya, I don't know if we have audio turned on for folks or if they can ask questions on their own, or if we wanted to save questions for the end. What would your advice be? Do you want to?
We can save questions for the end, and everyone can just unmute themselves, or they can put their questions in the chat as they come, and then I'll read them out at the end.
Perfect. Okay.
Up to everybody how they want to do that.
Okay, so I'll plow through the content and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. So as I mentioned earlier, a virtual private network enables you to access your critical assets securely. And then one of the questions that we often get asked is, okay, besides using a VPN when you're on Wi-Fi public networks that you're not sure about, do I need to use a VPN for everything? If someone's working from home, do they have to have a VPN? And I would say it depends. If you're getting them to connect back to resources inside your network, so your physical workplace, you want to gatekeep that kind of remote access through a VPN. You definitely don't want to have wide open remote net access back to your workplace without requiring a VPN, because criminals will use that. And quite honestly, a lot of universities, cities that have suffered very badly for that, where they've enabled remote desktop access for employees to get access to computers or servers still hosted in the workplace and didn't put it behind a VPN. That was quite problematic. If someone's trying to access Office 365, G Suite, those type of cloud services from their home, generally, I would say you don't need to have a VPN, because those connections are already secured with what you see as that HTTPS, so that encryption in transit that already exists. So that can enable you to save a little bit of money on your licensing for VPNs or scaling it. So only use it where you need to for employees that are going to use public Wi-Fi or travel a lot, or who are going to be remotely accessing resources physically stored inside your business versus cloud services. All right, so what about employees using their home Wi-Fi? I think it is important to have some talks about some basic security hygiene and safety for them. So encouraging them to have a unique network password and to make sure that something called WPA2 encryption is set as a minimum. A lot of older routers or telephone company provided gear might still be using a standard called WEP, which is trivial for anyone to, within radio range of their Wi-Fi, to hack into and listen to the communications or attack devices to gain information. So think carefully about that. If your home network for you or your employees is still using the default Rogers or Bell name and the default password you got when they first provided, not a bad idea to consider changing the name of your network to something that's not that, and to consider changing the password. Definitely change the default administrator password on your router. And ideally, one thing that we do recommend, and this is just a good security practice in any time, is if you have the option to turn a guest Wi-Fi network on, turn that on and put any of your Internet of Things, your Amazon Alexas, your smart light bulbs, and your kids' devices, children or teenagers' devices, put them on the guest network. And that will segment them away from your work network. And what can be really helpful is modern routers will often enable you to do priority or quality of service, called QoS. And you can actually prioritize the adult work computers over the kids' computers, so you can get your work done. It's not necessarily, I'd say, a cybersecurity tip, but it might be an IT efficiency / mom and dad parent sanity tip. We already talked about changing the default administrator password. one feature on routers that can get people in trouble, it's called WPS, and it was meant to make wirelessly connecting your printers and other peripherals easy. You just push the button on your router and push the button on the peripheral, and they'll magically connect to each other, exchange passwords. If you're not using that and you're comfortable going into the administrative setup, consider turning that off. If you are using a router that is more than 5 years old, that's not the one that shipped from Bell or Rogers, etc., consider upgrading it, because some of the things I've talked about, like the priority service or quality of service and additional security features such as auto updating the router software are enabled and available by default in newer routers. All right, this one seems like something that's thrown into every cybersecurity talk, but it's important. Please, please do not use weak passwords. Do not use the same or similar password for multiple accounts. And by the way, adding a couple of digits to the end or changing some little pattern is not a new unique password. Attackers have more than a couple billion different breach passwords now. Oftentimes for any individual, they might have 5 or 6 examples of past passwords you've used, and either they can guess your pattern or will use computers to guess your pattern. And so it's really important to think about using tools like LastPassword or 1Password, the so-called password manager tools, to create strong, truly unique passwords for all your sites. And that's just a really good thing to think about. You can still have separate passwords for critical accounts. I do. I have a very separate, very complex long password for my bank account and for my Canada Revenue accounts, just as an example, that I don't keep in my password manager, because if I wanted to be super paranoid, what if someone breached the password manager? Well, I limit my absolute highest risk things from that. All right, two-factor authentication. You've often probably heard the IT nerds, the security nerds talking about this all the time, but let me just give you a number to reinforce the difference that two-factor authentication can make. And two-factor authentication isn't just security questions. Proper two-factor authentication is, number one, your username, your password, and then, for example, my phone, you actually have to, in order to get my Office 365 account from a new computer or device, you have to get a code generated by an app called Microsoft Authenticator, and you would physically have to have my device to see that code, which rotates every 20 seconds or a minute, to actually enter into in my account. And so that additional phone is that second factor, that multi-factor authentication. And it can be fast and easy. Like I can actually approve logins by tapping my watch using that Microsoft Authenticator app. But again, if someone tricks me with a phishing email, guesses my password, if they're going to run an attack on me, unless they've stolen my phone or my watch, they're not going to get in. And Microsoft has shown that turning on two-factor authentication for things like Office 365 or G Suite can reduce your risk of a breach by 99.9%. Like that's pretty amazing. So consider turning on two-factor authentication. For small business owners, if you have a commercial bank account, your bank can actually provide a token, physical token that'll generate a code randomly every minute. And that can be a second factor for your commercial bank account. That's a really good thing as well. So set up auto updates. Now this is really important for your smartphones, for your computers and other devices. Make sure you don't put off important software updates. Remember that by the time most manufacturers put out software updates, criminals have been using vulnerabilities or exploits for months before then. So it's not like, oh, there's a security hole that criminals might start using in the future. I'll get around to patching this. No, they've most likely already been using it, and this can burn you. And let me give you an example of how criminals use this. I can send a phishing email as a criminal to you. I've learned that you use an iPhone because I've watched your social media and I've seen you post photos and selfies. So I know you use iPhone. So I craft an attack that's going to send you a link that's going to work for a new vulnerability in the iPhone that just clicking on the link can enable me to take control of your phone. And that kind of remote code execution, remote control, those vulnerabilities have happened in the past. So whenever you can, turn on auto updates for your software, and not just your computers and your smartphones. Think about your smart TV. Hilariously, I have an LG. I put off for 10 years buying a new TV because I don't like smart TVs. But I went and I checked, and it had an auto update feature. Your TV is a computer too. Protecting confidential information. And this isn't so much about cybersecurity. It does cover that, but it is about physical information security. So many of you may be professionals, lawyers, accountants, others, and you may have to print out documents at home. One, you should check with your employer, and if you are the employer, you should make clear policies and employees what's okay to print. What's okay to have in your home, and what are the expectations for the secure storage of documents, so that when we get back to work, they bring that information back, or they securely destroy that information. And if they need to store or back up confidential work information on a USB key or hard drive, make sure that they have a secure locked cabinet or room that they can keep it in. Remember that the break-ins probably are dropping because everyone's home. It's a super bad idea. But in normal times, leaving hard drives around has been the root of several major lawsuits against the federal government, including the Canada student loan breach, where someone was bringing 600,000 Canadians' records on an external hard drive. Setting up your remote workspace. Like, why are we talking about remote workspace? Well, because if you're in a high density living arrangement and your back is to the window and people walking by can read your screen, that could be a super bad thing. So be thinking about where you're set up to do your work. Be mindful of windows or mirrors and your surroundings. And remember, most smartphones now actually come with ridiculously powerful optical and digital zoom. I'll give you a quick story. I won't name which of the big accounting firms out of politeness, but I was in Toronto on a business trip. I rented an Airbnb. The Airbnb was beautiful, right downtown, looked right into one of the big accounting firms. This was about this time last year. It was tax filing season. They were all working late. Their blinds were all up, and I could just zoom in and read anything that was happening on there. It was pretty funny. So be careful about where you're remotely working. Another Toronto trip. I go to a couple of coffee shops near some of the major banks, and I'm going to tell you, I have learned a lot about really important banking decisions and financial information by just sipping my coffee and shutting my mouth. Confidential work conversations in public areas or in family areas that may not be appropriate. Another pro trip in terms of your remote workspace: get a physical camera cover. They're super helpful and can be a great way to protect your privacy. And, you know, God forbid if you do get malware in your computer that's trying to hijack your camera, having a physical cover on it can really reduce your exposure, literally and figuratively. And if you do a lot of traveling, consider talking to your employer, or if you are the employer, talking to your employees about having a privacy screen or filter that goes over the top of your laptop. And that can prevent over-the-shoulder surfing. I've been on a few airplanes, not lately, but over my career in the last couple of years. And the amount of last-minute work projects people are pounding away at their, well, crammed into their economy seats because we're all cheap, capital efficient, that I can see what they're working on has been hilarious. So consider privacy screens. All right. Anybody that's listened to me on CBC, this is not going to be a shocker. I'm not a big fan of the Amazon Alexas and Google Homes. I mean, I don't know. I grew up at the end of the Cold War. I never imagined we'd all be like, hey, it's super cool to put a giant monitoring device in our house because it gives us mildly useful information that it would be 30 seconds more to get from another information source. But it's a thing. If you are a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor doing telework, please unplug your damn Alexas and Google Homes during the workday, because you can say things, and we've all seen it, where you say the wrong thing, it thinks that the safe word has been activated, and it can start listening and recording and capturing information. So do yourself a favor, your clients, don't do calls or video conferencing near a smart speaker. Some professions, for example, in Ireland, the legal groups and regulators there, the law offices have given very explicit guidance to their lawyers. Don't be doing business in front of these smart devices. Be careful with personal devices. And if you are asking employees to use personal devices to do work from home, make sure you do have conversations about keeping the devices and the software up to date, your expectations for hygiene, making sure that if they're using their personal computer, that they have antivirus installed and that it's up to date. And this is really important. They really, really shouldn't use family computers. Any computer that a teenager or kid can touch, don't ever do your personal banking. Don't ever do work stuff on. The amount of times that kids will go look for free software because they wanted the latest version of Minecraft, but they haven't earned their allowance, and they end up downloading malware is stunning. And as a quick note, just as a general parenting advice, because the kids are often stuck at home with us while we're working, keep an eye on what apps your kids have installed on their smart devices. So those free games they may have downloaded, if you read the terms of service, a California firm got caught doing this a couple of years ago. The apps had permission to turn the microphone on the smartphone or the tablets, and they were listening to see what TV shows you were watching in the background, because their money model was to sell advertising efficiency and television program watching metrics back to the companies. It looked like your kid was playing a cute free game and they were spying on you. So keep an eye on the terms of service for your kids. A whole new meaning to Harriet the Spy. Be wary of phishing scams. We have seen a massive increase in email-based fraud. Email-based fraud is still the #1 way to sink a corporation, public organization's battleship. And so we've seen all kinds of different phishing scams related to COVID-19. We actually have a whole separate PowerPoint you can download in an ebook about, okay, who's using COVID-19 to cause chaos? How are they working? What are some Canadian examples? So I won't dwell into that, but in general, they're using things like pretending to be the business owner or the CEO. We need to do an urgent wire transfer. We need to do a financial transfer. So think very carefully about confirming any financial transactions that are material to your business by telephone. In-person communications is obviously not possible, but in regular business is recommended. But telephone, video chat, some other means of authenticating, think of it as two-factor authentication. So be very careful about those. Other ones that we've seen is, for mid-sized organizations, they pretend to be the IT team and they're saying, we've got a new VPN you have to use, download it here, and chaos ensues. So in summary, I've said a lot of scary things, but remember, remote work has a host of benefits. There's nothing that we do with technology that doesn't have a risk and reward equation. But there are simple things that we can do to maximize the rewards and minimize the risks. And talking to your employees, having clear guidelines, policies, rules, training them is critical. And remember, when in doubt, if you're an employee, always ask your organization questions about their expectations and policies for secure remote work.